Welcome, welcome, everyone. We are here with Dr. Jude Currivan, whose work I got to know about a year ago through Mark Gober, actually, who put me onto your work, who's also in the series. And I couldn't stop reading about you and your work. And of course, then the two books arrived on my doorstep and I couldn't put them down. These are Jude's latest books, which we're going to talk about today. But anyway, I'm just so honored to have you here today, Jude.
Renee, it's my great pleasure. And Mark is such a wonderful person. And again, an incredible author. So I'm delighted that you and he know each other well. And thank you and him for the kind introduction to you.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, this whole platform is about bridging science and spirituality. So, and you do it in spades in your work as a cosmologist. But for those who are new to your work, let's give them a little bit of background about you. Dr. Jude Currivan is a cosmologist, planetary healer, futurist, author, and the co-founder of Worldview, which we're going to talk about today as well. She has a master's degree in physics from Oxford University and a doctorate in archaeology, one of my favorite topics, from the University of Reading. Having grown up as a daughter of a coal miner in northern England, she has since journeyed to more than 80 countries. How exciting is that? She has experienced multidimensional reality since early childhood and worked with wisdom keepers, both incarnate and discarnate, of many traditions. The thing that we love so much about her work is that she integrates leading edge science, research into consciousness and universal wisdom teachings into a holistic worldview. This underpins her work, which is focused on emergent solutions to our collective planetary issues, which is really all about raising awareness and empowering fundamental change so that we don't destroy our planet. She is also an international corporate officer and has a career as a group finance director of two major international businesses. So in addition to her work as a cosmologist, she has experience and knowledge of world events, international politics, and global economic systems. And she has spoken about transformational reforms in the UK, US, Europe, Japan, and South Korea. Wow, what a background. She's also the author of 7 books available in 16 languages. And I mentioned 2 of them, the 2 that I've read today, the latest 2, and we're going to talk about them today. So welcome once again.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you so much. I'm so looking forward to wherever this conversation goes. It could go many ways. Absolutely.
Same here. Usually I have all my questions done the night before and I was tweaking them and like questions were just pouring through me. I think I could have, just gone on forever. But one thing I do want to start with, mainly because it just intrigued me, and I lived in England during my college years for about 7 years in Surrey. So I'm pretty familiar with the country and love it over there. And I was fascinated that you're a coal miner's daughter, right? This is the language of poetry and lyrics of music. So I'm curious, what was it about your childhood in northern England that kind of led you to study physics, cosmology, and archaeology?
It's a very good question. It really began when I was very young, when I was about 4 years old. I had what I call my first supernormal experience when I was in my bedroom and a discarnate light started to speak with me. So I was hearing a voice in my head, not through my ears, but actually, clairaudiently. And that began a lifelong conversation with that discarnate entity, but many, many, many others, numerous discarnate entities, intelligences, sentience, ever since then. And that really opened the door of my curiosity. My mum used to say my favorite word when I was a child was why? And it's been my favorite word my whole life. So that opening of that incredibly larger perspective of the nature of reality than what I was experiencing, of course, as a kid growing up in the north of England, in the family that I had, and a wonderful and loving family it was. But I was exploring worlds. I was walking between worlds, exploring worlds. So that really then became a fascination, both of, how is the world as it is? Why is it as it is? And also because I was being opened up to ancient wisdom through these discarnate conversations, I was fascinated by the ancient wisdom, for example, of ancient India, of Greece isn't that ancient, but, ancient India, Egypt, especially from a very early age and onwards. So that scenic route that you described very beautifully and kindly began really very early on. So, science, spirituality, the nature of consciousness, universal wisdom teachings. And in my 20s and 30s and early 40s, just to make sure I was grounded, international business. But that really was independent in a way of my family circumstances, because my mum and my dad, but my dad died very young, so my mum brought my brother and I up, always supported my learning because she knew that it was something I was passionate about. But she also realized that it was in a way, my journey, my life journey, was this curiosity and where it might lead me. And she was incredibly supportive and loving to support me wherever it would lead me.
The incarnate energy, that the light that came through to you, did it have a name and did it have a message?
Eventually, yes. He told me his name was Thoth, the ancient Egyptian wisdom bringer. And through his naming of himself and his introducing me to other intelligences, I started to study ancient Egypt, its history, its cosmology, its spirituality, and I couldn't have had a better guide, of course. But, one of the things that he told me very early on is that in the ancient Egyptian language, the word that would have described him and other beings such as Osiris, Horus, Sekhmet, Isis were Netra, Netta singular, Netra plural. And he said they've been wrongly translated as gods and goddesses. We're not. We are archetypal consciousness. Yeah? And so when he spoke to that in that way of me, it made much more sense, because the ancient Egyptians were incredibly profound and sophisticated in their perception. So to actually understand Netra as being archetypes of consciousness made much more sense. And then I started to appreciate that other names in other cultures were similarly archetypal wisdom keepers, archetypal intelligences and sentiences. And I've had those conversations and those explorations my whole life.
That's brilliant. Actually, it's interesting because, one of the things that we didn't talk about, my partner is a full embodied channel, and that Thoth energy has come to us many times. And, of course, we started reading up about ancient Egypt, which you do when an ancient Egyptian god comes with a message to you, and it's interesting that energy has also come to Mark Ober, who we talked about earlier, and it's all about writing and art and wisdom and, which you do and which I do. And so I find that fascinating from an archetypal parallel. And, Jean Houston, who's also in this series, who I love, she spoke about a similar analogy for her, that a Greek goddess, right?
Dina came to Jean's mom.
Yeah, that's what she said. That's what she said. And she's funny because she said, in no way do I worship Athena. However, which was just
absolutely
awesome. Yeah. So I think these archetypes are very helpful for us as realms of consciousness and specific areas that we can learn from.
Very much so. And I mean, the old paradigm that we've sort of collectively had, a worldview we've had, has been one of, materialism and essential separation of a universe that doesn't have any place, a cosmology and a paradigm that doesn't have any place for any of this. And yet what's now emerging, the leading edge of science and very recent discoveries as Mark knows as well, and as you know, is turning it on its head. And as I write in the Cosmic Hologram and the story of Gaia, that old paradigm of materialism and separation is being turned on its head by evidence. And what's happening is the emergent understanding is convergent with spiritual traditions, with universal wisdom teachings, with indigenous teachings, into this unified understanding of the nature of reality, which of itself is multidimensional. So has all of the space for all of this wonderful supernormal phenomena that is now so well evidenced, but also for this incredible wisdom of so many levels of archetypal sentience.
You know, it's interesting. You just literally answered my next question. I mean, it really had to do with inspiration along the way because, you know, the materialist worldview is still out there. I mean, it's not as strong as it was 50 years ago, even 20 or 30 years ago, but it's still there, right? And so, you know, thank God for these scientists who have been bold enough to speak their truth, the David Bohms of the world, and all those since him. But, you know, we're still not quite there. What is perhaps an inspiration that you've received more from the data side, right? Because we all have these experiences that we can't explain. But from the data side, that's the exciting part, because without data, the scientists don't give it any credibility.
Yeah.
So what has been an inspiration from the data and research side that can help us move over this bridge of separation?
Well, first of all, I think it's that the weight of the evidence and the fact that the evidence is now coming forward at all scales of existence. You know, it's not just like little pieces of this. It's across all scales of existence and across numerous fields of research. So it's not just the physics and the cosmology. It's the biology, it's the meteorology, it's the chemistry, it's all the, and it's not just, this evidence doesn't just reveal what I'm sharing and what, you know, I write about in what we might have called the natural world. It's revealing the same meaningful patterns of information throughout our entire collective human behavior. So for me, the grounding of all of this and the compelling evidence, has enabled us to put not just an underpinning and a framing together, which I do in both books, but it's also enabling a unitive narrative, because we tell stories, we're storytellers. We tell stories to each other, to share with each other, to explain, you know, however we view the world. That's what we do. And what this evidence is now doing in its accumulation, is actually enabling us to articulate a new and unitive narrative that can underpin and frame us and give us authentic grounding in this understanding of unity in diversity. I mean, I've got two wonderful friends. I've got more than two wonderful friends. I have many wonderful friends. But two of them, called Julie Krull and Joni Carley, talk of, now we have the evidence that unity, the wholeness of the world, is not ideal, it's real. And Joni talks about unity as our existential reality. And this is so important, Renee, that a group of us articulated a unity narrative about a year ago, less than a year ago. And in less than a year, it's gone from being articulated for the first time to the United Nations just before Christmas, formally adopting a cluster of 16 organizations, NGOs, based on unity.
Wow.
And what that does is, and they're just the founding members, so it's going to grow mightily this year. All of that means that from a unitive perspective, from this understanding of wholeness, we can go into the United Nations and begin to help change policy for the implementations of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and Agenda 2030. Very, very practical. we've now got the opportunity to look at those from a unity-based perspective. And it's only because the evidence is so wide and so deep and so compelling and so convergent that can happen.
Yeah, so true. I mean, it's interesting because in 2017, which is, about the same time that the cosmic hologram came out, you founded Whole Worldview.
I did.
And I thought that was ironic because just yesterday, I was on an interview with Dr. Jill Taylor. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her work, but
I am.
yes, amazing, right? And so her latest book is called Whole Brain Living. Is her latest book. I know. And it just made me think of your organization because it's just coming up from everywhere about this whole world living, whole brain living, which suggests that we've been living half world everything for a very long time now. And of course, as you so often eloquently say, that our worldview drives our belief systems, right? Our thoughts, our decisions, our behaviors, our words, everything. And then, as part of this organization that you founded, you're spot on when you say that our current dominant worldview is based on illusion of separateness and separation, causing a collective disease and a threat to humanity's future. So we need a new narrative. That part's clear. And obviously unity and unity consciousness is that narrative. How can we bring that narrative into places like education, right? At the ground up for the next generation?
Absolutely. In fact, a lot of what I do, I mean, I've written the books, but the books are essentially seed points to serve potential transformation. So a lot of what I do, whether it's with the unitive cluster at the United Nations, but is about unitive-based transformational change. So over the last year, more and more, and certainly into this year, unitive education, unitive justice. Other colleagues and friends of mine, including Elena Moskova, Jonathan Granoff, and others, have come together to have a unitive justice declaration. What does justice mean?
Wow.
From a grounding of unitive awareness. I'm working with unitive economics at the moment because our economics drive so much, and they are an economics of separation. So if again we can actually come from this unitive awareness, we can co-create unitive-based economics, which means that we follow Gaian principles. We follow universal principles of relationship and right relationship and service and whole being. So all of these things are the outcomings of our world. Our current organizations and structures aren't even 100 years based science. The quantum physics and relative didn't get a look in. They're based on 19th century mechanistic perspectives.
True.
As you say, whether it's the education, our organizations, our governance, whatever it is. So we're going to jump more than a century, I feel, because what we now can do is go from that mechanistic perspective with all the society-based organizations to a unitive perspective, underpinned and framed by a unitive narrative, which is self-grounded on this unitive, evidential-based understanding. And from there, we can bring forward all of these transformational changes to all that we are and relate and do in the world. So it's happening.
It is happening, yes, and it's happening quickly. I do think, when I think about some of the work that we've done and also tapping into the ancient wisdom in the East, right? They've always known, our indigenous elders have always known in the West and the East that we're energy, right? Everything's energy. And of course, scientists hate that because many do. Many hate that word. And in fact, when I was talking to, Jill about this, she was saying that in university, the one thing the two words that you couldn't say were energy and consciousness, right? And that's not that long ago, right? There's this stigma still today about energy medicine, right? And the fact that we are energy. And I just wonder, imagine if we really did understand that as the nature of reality, that we're all energy beings. I actually wanted to read this because I thought it was so great. And I thought David Bohm would be proud when I read this. But this was the fundamental attributes of the cosmic hologram that is the physical reality of our universe are all innate in information that's universally expressed as conserved energy matter and entropically expressed as space-time. Such information, right? I love the way that you emphasize that. Such information makes up the exquisite order, which David Bohm talks about, of course, and fine-tuning of its instructions, the wonderfully elegant simplicity of its initial conditions, the amazing versatility of energy matter that constitutes its single ingredient. And that is in your chapter about perfect outcome, which I thought was great. And then later you write, from its non-physical foundations, the cosmic hologram encodes informational fractal patterns of potentiality that manifest through space-time at all scales of existence and that dynamically guide the templates of evolution. Now, that also reminded me of some of the stuff that the philosopher Tim Freke is working on, who's also English, by the way, and a friend of ours.
Yeah, I know Tim.
Yeah, he's a friend of ours. We love him. Anyway, in our interview with him too, and other conversations over the years, he talks about that emerging. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I would say is that the pioneers, the quantum pioneers of the early 20th century were revealing extraordinary reality, extraordinary discoveries about the nature of reality. But the deeper philosophical implications of those discoveries were pushed to the side, not by them, but the wider scientific community. Yeah. So alongside the quantum scientists, you also had Einstein. So you had these two pillars that became the two pillars of 20th century science emerging around about 100 years ago. So quantum science is all about energy and matter. And what was being discovered, as you rightly say, is that everything is energy, and energy is vibrational. It's quantized, which means it's in little packets. So it's like notes of energy, vibrational notes of essence. And that an observer alters what is observed. There was no separation. It was really showing us the illusion of separation. But it was so radical that those philosophical appreciations were just shoved to the side. Equally, relativity theory was showing us that space and time are relative to an observer. And Einstein's great genius was not realizing that. It was like realizing that for our universe to exist, the two had to be considered together. Yeah. And then they became invariant. Then you could have a universe that sticks together, but you had to understand it in terms of space, time. So you had these two amazing revelations about the nature of reality: quantum physics describing energy matter, relativity physics describing space, time. But the realization now is that they are not fundamental, that they describe a reasonably, a very good way, actually, an extremely good way. They describe the appearance of our universe, but they don't actually of themselves are fundamental. That appearance emerges from deeper levels of non-physical causation. And it does so as meaningful information, which is why I always put the little dash in the middle. So we have meaningful information underlying the appearance of our universe that expresses itself in one way as conserved and quantized energy matter, and in a different way, as you mentioned, entropic space-time. Now, the key to this is another fundamental of physics, which is the laws of thermodynamics. Because someone once said that the laws of thermodynamics are the high notes of physics. I would say they're the whole gamut, they're the whole symphony. That actually, when you look at thermodynamics and then you express the laws of thermodynamics as information, actually, quantum physics sort of drops out the end of it. It's like a free gift. And the other free gift is relativity theory, because the first law of thermodynamics, when you expand it to be based on information, is exactly that the energy matter of our universe, information expresses the energy matter of our universe, is conserved. And this is key, quantized and conserved, because you're absolutely right then. When you look at healing, when you look at all of the sort of supernormal phenomena, they all are based essentially on the vibrational and quantized nature of energy matter. But even more, they're based on the information expressed in that way. So when we do energy healing, it's actually informational healing. It's an intention to heal that has the vibrational energy as its waveguide, as its way of relating from the healer to the subject of the healing. And that applies throughout the whole of our universe and all of energy matter. But that only allows our universe to exist. It's the second law. And the second law is information expressed as space-time in its entropic way enables our universe to evolve. So when you have this absolutely wondrous, simple framework, you note a few other things like the holographic principle. You get the most beautiful model of consciousness, of a cosmic hologram of a universe where mind and consciousness aren't what we have. They're literally what we in the whole world are, which of course, again, was pioneered by the quantum physicists, pioneered by Einstein, pioneered by David Bohm.
Yeah. I mean, it explains entanglement, right? And that beautiful dance, that beautiful way that we're all meshed together, even if we can't understand it. And, that entanglement, that spooky action at a distance, whatever you want to call it, right? And Lynn McTaggart in her work with the field and the power of 8, it's all about that also, the intention of these 8 individuals to heal.
Absolutely. Because it's the information that vibrationally is more than the sum of its parts that can actually both direct the healing, but also there's a wave that comes back for those that are intending the healing, as long as it's done altruistically.
Yes, that's key. That
is key. Yeah,
because a lot of people say, well, I tried that and it didn't work for me. And it's like, well, did you believe? Did you have any sense of awareness? I mean, what was the purpose of doing it, right? Was it just for selfish gain, or was it for the betterment of the all, which is a principle in itself, right?
It is a principle in itself. But we're now able, it seems to me, with all the evidence and this framework, to bring this all together. And so it's now an emergent cosmology of a living, conscious, evolving, mindful universe within the infinite eternity of the cosmos. It is so, and it's meaningful, Renee. This is what I really hope folks understand by this. We've had a meaningless, purposeless paradigm. And so what does that do to us in terms of who we are and how we relate? And now it's been turned on its head to show that we are microcosms. We're microcosmic co-creators of a meaningful, purposeful, multidimensional, conscious, evolutionary universe.
Well, this is a perfect segue into multidimensional realms of consciousness and non-locality.
Absolutely.
So, in spiritual circles, they speak about this all the time. Cynthia Bourgeault calls it subtle realms of existence. In the East, these realms are more real than perceived, actually, right? Than our perceived physical realms. New Age spiritualists often call it the fifth dimension and beyond. Dr. Irvin Laszlo, who we also love, calls it the Akashic field. And then we just talked about Lynn McTaggart. She just talks about it as the field, and others call it the quantum field. What is it for you, from your understanding and your background as a cosmologist? What is that field?
I'd just like to take a couple of steps back to what you talked about, spooky action at a distance, because of course that was Einstein's understanding. If he was with us now, I think he'd be whooping. I think he'd be jumping up and down and whooping.
Yes, he would.
This really now is bringing all of this together and showing it's not an either or, it's an and. That within space-time, we have, from the very first moment, 13.8 billion years ago, the beginning of space and time. I talk about it not being a big bang, but the first moment of an ongoing big breath. As space has expanded, time's flowed ever since. There's been an arrow of time. The past has flowed to the present and is flowing to the future. The past has a sort of a journey of causality to it. And it's a journey from simplicity to complexity. The future, we're at the bow wave of the potentiality of the future. So that's within space-time. But what quantum physicists also appreciated is that for quantum physics to work at all, our universe also has to exist and evolve as a unified entity. So it knows itself in its totality. This is what Irvin means by the Akashic records, that all of the past is held. The future's not yet written, it's not deterministic in that sense. The laws of physics more than likely stay the same through its whole life cycle, but its potential for conscious evolution is still unfolding.
So it's the potentialities. It's the potentialities of probabilities.
Exactly. It's potentiality of what we can consciously evolve to, what Gaia can consciously evolve to, what our solar system, our galaxy, the whole universe can consciously continue to evolve into ever greater levels of complexity, diversity, interdependence, into being. That is all potentized and potentialized. But our universe goes through all of this, experiences all of this as a unified entity. So the boundary of what we call space-time is rather like the sort of surface of a balloon. As it expands, more and more information can be experienced within what we call the physical realm. Mm-hmm. But it's not, rather unlike a balloon, which has this sort of latex, very thin surface, think of our universe as a fuzzy balloon, so that there's the physicality of what's experienced within space-time, but there are multidimensional levels of sentience that are all part of this evolutionary journey. It's just that they're not incarnate within space-time. They are discarnate intelligences, archetypal intelligences, whether it be angelic, elemental, devic, ascended masters, those that have passed over. They're all part of this journey, this exploration, this exploratory, experiential journey of a living, conscious, evolving universe where mind and consciousness aren't something we have. They're literally what we in the whole world are. So this now can encompass all of these, this wisdom, this guidance, this richness, this consciousness within this beautiful evolutionary story. That's our universal story, and it's our story.
Beautiful, actually. Before this is actually kind of a nice segue into the story of Gaia, but I wanted to read both what you kind of summarized from the cosmic hologram, and it was also leading into your latest book about Gaia, and that is information is reality, it is bit, mind is matter, matter is mind, and that mind and consciousness isn't something we have, it's literally what we and the whole world are, which is really what you were demonstrating from those last set of examples.
Yeah, Absolutely. It literally turns everything around
Absolutely.
from that old materialistic separation paradigm. And yet it comes now into full convergence and integration with universal wisdom teaching. And ultimately it invites us to wake up, to remember inseparable, but it invites us to grow up and take, what I feel, to hear and answer and respond to the invitation of our entire universe to become its co-evolutionary partners.
Yeah, creators. I mean,
we're microcosmic co-creators. We grow up to be that.
Yeah. You're talking about accountability, which is, one of the things that frustrate me in some spiritual circles is this spiritual bypassing. And, whether you come from the side of science or spirituality or any level in between, we have to be held accountable. Interviewed an indigenous chief as part of this series. And one question that was presented to him is, well, why did you heed the call? Or when the message came from the wisdom keepers to you, why you? And his response was, why not me?
Right? I was just about to say the same thing. Why not me?
Why not me? It's an honor. Like, it's an honor that I'm receiving this information and that I can hear it and perhaps someone else didn't. And I thought that was just beautiful, because it was like, well, of course, I feel the honor of having that vision, right? So that was beautiful. One of the things that blew me away I didn't expect this from your book. And of course, it's the story of Gaia. But this was interesting. So you brilliantly start at the beginning of our 13.8 billion years old universe, and later, Gaia's birth at around 4.5 billion or so, right? And that you say that stories take time to tell, but stories don't really begin with us. Mm-hmm. I love that you called it the big breath rather than the Big Bang. And I was telling a friend the other day, a female friend the other day, that this interview was going to take place. And I was telling her about it. And she's, she's a spiritual seeker. First thing that she said, which I thought was interesting, well, wow, how refreshing. Because the Big Bang always feels so masculine. And the big breath is like this feminine, principle, or this feminine nature. I just thought that was great. Do you want to speak about that? Was there any kind of correlation or parallel for you with that? Or is it more that that's what emerged for you as a better way to describe what happened 13.8 billion years ago?
Thank you. Again, it's an and, I think. I mean, first of all, when we use the word Big Bang, it wasn't big. We know that it was facetious. It was tiny. But if I ask you, Renee, if I say the word bang, what does that mean for you? What does that feel for you?
Explosive, energetic, forceful. Yeah. It does feel masculine.
it does, but it also feels a little chaotic.
Yeah, it does.
And yet we now know that our universe began in the most incredibly ordered and exquisitely fine-tuned way. So that's why I felt that it was far more helpful to describe. And it wasn't and I wanted to sort of emphasize it wasn't just a one-off, that it's an ongoing process. And so by actually renaming it as Big Breath, it was like the first moment of this ordered, fine-tuned, meaningful, ongoing big breath. So space has continued to expand and time has flowed forward. And of course, that's the other side of it. Because space has expanded, which it needs to do for our universe to be able to evolve and include more and more information of its evolutionary journey, then that is like a big breath. And this is how the ancient Indian teachings talked about our universe as the breath of Brahman. And it just felt so much more. And of course, the ancient Indian word for breath is prana, which is also the same word for spirit. So it's like it all came together. And then just back to your friend's point about the divine feminine aspect of it. Another tradition talks about, the Ching talks about, in the beginning is one, it's the wholeness. the one becomes two. It doesn't separate, it differentiates. The one becomes two, the two becomes three, and from the three, 10,000 things are born. So I saw that first moment of this ongoing big breath as when those three universal attributes of the divine feminine, the divine masculine, and the third, the divine child, came into exploratory and evolutionary expression. And I'm going to write a lot more about that in the next book.
Oh, that's great. I mean, every tradition in the world talks about the pyramid.
Absolutely.
Christianity, it's the Son, the Father, the Holy Ghost, right? It's different things in different traditions, but they exist in all of them.
The Trinity is fundamental, and it is that wholeness that then differentiates and then resolves itself in that sense, in the threefold nature.
Not a surprise that the pyramids in Egypt, right, were made that way.
Absolutely. But as you say, every tradition has that sense of Trinity, of being, fundamental to its fullness of expression. And here we are again, the leading edge science show, there are so many twos and threes at the very basis of a universe, as Einstein said, is as simple as it can be, but no simpler to embody its evolutionary purpose. So that wholeness, differentiates. It differentiates through electromagnetic fields, magnetic, electric, and then, the third, the way forward. It differentiates into quarks. It differentiates into neutrons and protons, electrons. All the whole process, not just the physicalized nature of the information, but also on so many other levels, philosophically, symbolically, archetypally, mythologically, all of it has that same perspective.
Sacred geometry, right?
Sacred geometry, absolutely.
So I have a question about the attunements that you write in your book. But before I go there, just because you just mentioned a word that has been on my mind for a long time, and that's magnetic fields. Can you explain this to people in layman's terms so we can get our head around these magnetic fields and the human being connection to those magnetic fields?
Well, more and more evidence is showing that electromagnetic fields have been primordial since going back to that first moment or first moments of the big breath, that they have pervaded space and time ever since. And the difference between an electric field and a magnetic field is electrical fields tend to be shorter lived and shorter in terms of spatial expansion, whereas magnetic fields can grow and they can develop and they can be very, very long lasting, and they play themselves out at numerous scales, from the tiniest scales to the whole of space. So very early on, as space, from the first moments of the Big Bang, as space expanded and as time flowed, it was really magnetic fields that pervaded space as a cosmic web. And it was on that cosmic web that the later stars and galaxies actually formed. And we know this cosmologically because we can look out and we can see the voids and we can see the web. And we know that it is actually based on these incredibly now stretched and long-lasting magnetic fields. But then go forward, and magnetic fields play an enormous role in galactic structures, because what they do is they hold the structure, they hold the order. We're still coming to terms with what dark matter might be as a scaffolding, but on the sort of the visible level, magnetic fields are key. And I think we've got a lot still to learn with them. But on the galactic level, they are fundamental to shepherding interstellar clouds of dust and gas to form the birthing places for planetary systems. They actually help bring the order. So that in my sense, and again, it's a journey of discovery very much, but for me too, is they hold the memory. I think they hold the memory of the whole universe.
Yeah. I mean, that's our understanding too, or at least the information that we get, but it's still hard to make sense of that with our linear brains and constructs, right? Because it doesn't make sense to us. How can it hold memory, right? But it does. Like,
you think about CDs.
Yeah,
it's the magnetics within our comms technology that holds the memory.
That's a great analogy. Actually, it's a great analogy, and we feel it, even if, and I do think there are some methods to produce and recreate what is stored. But we're not quite there yet, but we feel it, right? So if we go to a battleground where...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You can feel the human imprint. A lot of my work over the last 25, 30 years has been to serve the release of those imprints of trauma and to replace them or invite love in as that trauma is released. And you're absolutely right. Of course, it's primarily the magnetic energy, informational lines of Gaia that hold much of that, that hold much of that memory.
Yeah, it's really the field of consciousness that we all have access to.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is that we just don't believe that we have access to it.
Well, hopefully we're coming to the point because, with Mark's, but so many books and my own books, my own work, Mark's, where all of us are, more and more and more people. The evidence is growing exponentially. And secondly, more and more people who are investigating this are coming to the same understanding. And we're sharing it, and we're sharing it with folks like yourself and myself too, who get it in all different ways. But, the information, the understanding is coming in so many ways of knowing. And then it's being validated, again, in so many different ways.
So 2 other things that make your book brilliant. So on one side, you do these things called attunements, which I mentioned before we talked about magnetic fields, and then also travels, right? So in the beginning of each section, and this is for people who haven't read the book yet, there's an attunement. And, in some chapters, there's what you call travels. I thought that was amazing and bold because, coming from your world, I mean, those attunements, I sort of saw them as meditations or ways to think and be quiet, right, with yourself, which allows you to understand that connection that we have with Gaia. So brilliant, 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 right? But what was the inspiration to write the book in this way? Because, your audience is going to definitely be more left brain thinking. And so that was really bold to do that, So was there an inspiration or a moment that came to you and said, I want to include this as kind of maybe a natural bridge?
My husband.
Wow.
My darling husband, because the writing was flowing. And we were just discussing things. And I mean, we've been together in this life, at any rate, for more than 20 years. And we've journeyed together. So my husband is very aware that, I'm open to many, many different ways of knowing. And of course, we've had the most incredible experiences. And some of those that I share in the story of Gaia before we met. And we were just talking about the book generally one morning. And he said, well, why don't you include some of these? And
wow.
It just went, yeah, okay.
That's amazing. Well, it's going to be a nice eye and third eye opener for those who are not expecting it to be in the book. But the beautiful thing for those of you who have a hard time with that, there's lots of scientific data and evidence in the book that draws these parallels too. And one of the things that made me become a child again is you talked about the connection between our planet and us as human beings at a microscopic level, the subatomic particles, the atoms of who we are. And this was fascinating. You write that an ingredient in RNA has been found in a meteorite and that nucleic acids of RNA and DNA, lipids, and amino acids, which make up proteins, form Gaia's biosphere. And, it's part of the crust, right, of who we are. And so those parallels were amazing to me, because if we can't feel it, then at least scientifically, right, we have this, we are made of what Gaia is made of. We are made of the stardust, the particles, everything. Can you just talk about that in a way that's digestible for people who have no knowledge of either side, right? How does that impact my day-to-day life?
Okay. Our paradigm, going back to what we were saying earlier, materialism and separation, literally separates us. It separates us from each other. It separates us from Gaia. It separates us from our entire universe. And I say, as you mentioned right at the beginning of the story of Gaia, that our stories don't begin with us. They begin, with our parents, with their parents, as far back as we have memory. We now have a memory of our story that goes back 13.8 billion years. The hydrogen in our bodies is as old as the universe. Just think of that for a moment. The hydrogen in our bodies is as old as the universe. The rest of us was alchemy in stars billions and billions of years ago, which is why we say we're stardust. We're older than stardust, but we also are stardust. Go back even before our sun was born, before our solar system, before Gaia was born. We go back to those interstellar clouds of gas and dust I mentioned. All the building blocks for us were already starting to assemble there, shepherded by magnetic fields, bathed by ultraviolet light from nearby stars, held in tiny little ice-based dust, and that all the sort of the what we call prebiotic molecules, the sugars, the lipids, the RNA, we now discovered them, measured them in these interstellar dust clouds. So even before our planet was born, it was already waiting to go to its next level of the journey to us.
That's amazing.
So, our universe's story literally is our story. We belong.
Yeah, it's similar to Brian Swim's message, this ever evolving, cosmology of who we are, and the brilliance of that, if we could only realize that and get excited about it, right?
Yeah, and remember it, because when we do, in my experience, Renee, we enter into such a profound relationship, a enriching relationship, a joyous relationship, a grateful relationship, not just with each other, but our planetary home Gaia. We grow up to become Gaians.
Ooh, I like that. I like that. Well, I mean, especially if that, since that's my nickname. So, it's easy, I think, or easier, I should say, easier for us human beings to feel this connection to nature, the beautiful, vibrant things around us, like rivers and trees and mountains and lakes, right? But what about the void, right? So I always find this fascinating, because in Western pagan circles, right, they talk about the four elements: water, air, earth, and fire, which is kind of fundamental to most traditions. And the fifth, mostly in the West, is the ether, which we're only beginning to understand. But in Japan, the fifth element is the void. And of course, in Eastern traditions, they talk about the void all the time as everything and nothing. And everything, there is nothing, and in nothingness, there's everythingness. What is that for you from a scientific perspective?
I think it transcends science. It's, we're on a revelatory journey, it seems to me, at the moment. And a revelatory journey where scientific evidence is converging with these deeper perspectives of the nature of reality. But it is still a journey. And I think it's important to also appreciate that those insights from millennia ago were marvelous. But we're moving on. we are continuing to evolve our understanding of the nature of the whole world. And we're using different languaging. So for me,
yeah, we are. That's true.
It's not about going back and saying, well, that was that word and this was that understanding. How does this correlate? I'm far more interested personally, having, delved deep into all this all my life and honored and respected all of it. I'm so excited about the revelatory nature of this time and what this can open us up to. Because if you go to the void, you could suggest that that's the ground of all being, whereas there is no differentiation. You can say that then, universes are thought forms of an infinite and eternal cosmic mind. But here and now, what personally I'm really focused on is now what? What does it mean?
What does it mean? Yeah.
I've many years ago, I moved beyond the parsing, the parsing of different terminologies, and we've now got a profound, emergent understanding of the unified nature of reality and its meaningful and purposeful nature, and of us. So for me, now is what does that mean, in what do we choose? And how do we behave? Yeah. And what can it mean from that unitive awareness, that unitive narrative, that unitive perspective of unity and ultimate belonging? What can that mean? First of all, in healing the traumas that we collectively embody because of that illusion of separation, without blame or shame, but let's heal this now. Secondly, what can it mean in terms of transformational approaches and unitive approaches to the great issues of our time and the great sort of underpinnings of our world, the economics and finance, the education, all of that? How can we link up and lift up from this unitive understanding to help transform all of those? And that's, for me, what we can do. And that's, for me, what is our opportunity.
It alters our belief systems, right? Because when you have the darkness of the void based on our conditioning, especially if you come out of a religious background, right? That dark is negative, dark is evil, and light is God, right? Light is Muhammad and Jesus.
You're still playing the duality game.
It's the duality.
Separation game,
That's right. That's right. It's the separate. It's not the world of cohesiveness and non-duality, right? When we go to those places, because anyone who's done shadow work knows that you need the dark to rise and play and dance in your shadows.
Exactly. But in healthy expression. And it's where it becomes dysfunctional expression, whether it's light or shadow or whatever it may be. And when you're still seeing it oppositionally and in duality, rather than, the ancients had some wonderful symbology. The yin yang symbol is a beautiful symbology.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And others, and now we're coming, I feel, to this convergence of a remembered wholeness.
Mm.
And I come back to then, what is our choice at this moment when we do have all the evidence, all the appreciation that unity is our existential reality?
Beautiful. My last question really has to do with cooperation between organisms and coherence, because, suddenly the word coherence it's not mainstream yet. Yeah, it's not mainstream yet, but it's moving. It's moving there, and I think
is.
Yeah, Bruce Lipton and Dr. Joe Dispenza talk about it. They're not quite mainstream yet either, but they talk about coherence, heart math, right? They're the ones who really came out with the coherence and was able to measure it for a way to heal the body, both the body and the mind, right? So emotionally and physically. What can we learn from nature and how well organisms among us cooperate and play together? Because you have so many beautiful examples of this, at such a microscopic level of how there is just this beautiful coherence and dance together, the yin and the yang, the ebb and the flow. What can we learn from these microorganisms at such a subatomical level of how they dance together for humanity to bring coherence into our own life?
Well, the whole universe is a story of collaboration. It's a story of innate relationships. And in that unity, relationships can be competitive, or they can be cooperative, or they can be a mix of both. But they're always collaborative because there is no separation. So there is nothing that is not in relationship. The question is, what happens and how does it happen when the evolutionary arc of our entire universe continues its journey from simplicity to complexity? And every single step of that way has involved cooperation.
Yeah.
And, you know, competition can be very helpful in terms of weeding out weakness sometimes. Sometimes it goes over the top, and then you have to sort of come back into some sort of balance. But collaboration is innate to the whole story of our universe. But coming to Gaia and the last, and before Gaia was born, going back to those interstellar dust clouds, there was cooperative relationships that were crucial to then, when our planetary home was born, the opportunity to evolve into ever greater levels of complexity. And that's been the ongoing story. So starting with cells, single-celled biological organisms with no nucleus, down to, 2.4 billion years ago, a bacteria was able to find ways of using oxygen for energy, which is vital to greater complexity, but oxygen is a toxic substance. So there had to be cooperation as to be able to use oxygen, but not that it destroyed everything around it. We go further on. We have this ability for one organism in the entire history of Gaia to find ways of taking the energy of the sun, and carbon dioxide to create oxygen.
Yeah.
Again, we're into cooperation. We're into those tiny little beings cooperating with other microscopic beings to then form nucleated cells, to then form multi-celled creatures, ultimately to form plants through that photosynthesis. Cooperation has driven every level of increasing complexity. And it's not a single leveled cooperation, it's multi-leveled. And this is what we're learning, because our old mechanistic worldviews created structures based on hierarchies. Gaia doesn't work in hierarchies. She works in multi-level collaborations. Yes? And this is what we're now beginning to understand we need to learn.
Yeah.
We need to learn from her. We need to just open our hearts, open our minds, be silent. We have the ability to do this. Attune with her multidimensional wisdom. And then we can learn. And this is such a fun, and then we can heal. And this to me is such a fundamental part of our potential to consciously evolve.
Yeah, if we were conscious beings with that perspective, sure, there still might be borders between the Ukraine and Russia, and sure, there might be, actual borders, but they might just be labels rather than, borders for fear, right? I mean, a lot of the borders that we create in our lives, whether they're geographical or social economical, is based on fear that I'm not going to have enough. It's the deprivation model rather than the abundance model.
It's a separation. It's a disease, as you say, a separation. And for me now, within our collective psyche, where we have those ongoing behaviors, there are areas of our psyche that are unhealed, as yet unhealed.
Yeah.
And so we have an opportunity to come together to heal those. And we can only do that from love.
Yeah, love is the underlying glue that really bonds the universe together.
It is. what I write about is the science of love.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. That is beautiful. Well, Jude, this has been an amazing conversation. Is there anything else that you'd like to let viewers and listeners know about your work, your upcoming book, anything?
Oh, Renee, thank you. I just invite folks to visit www.wholeworld-view.org. The homepage says "Welcome Home," and it's replete with lots and lots of what's going on and YouTubes and all the sorts of things. And we also have a quarterly newsletter just to share all that's unfolding. Not just the science, but actually what's unfolding from these ways of bringing a unitive narrative and a unitive understanding to transformational change.
Beautiful. Well, we'll make sure that people tune into those, and everyone should go buy your books because they're riveting. And I find myself falling asleep and dreaming about some of the things that are in your books. I know. I'm absolutely obsessed with your work. So beautiful. And we're just so thrilled to be able to offer a way to expand your voice to more people, because it's a really important voice about unity consciousness, and really that there doesn't need to be a bridge between science and spirituality anymore. They're one and the same.
They are. They're just, absolutely. And isn't that a wonderful moment for all of us? This really challenging, pivotal moment, collective moment of choice, that we now have this underpinning and framing that can empower us and inspire us and guide us and invite us into this next adventure of who we really are.
Yeah, that remembrance. Well said. Thank you so much.
Thank you, my dear. I really loved our exploration, and thank you for all the wonderful work that you're doing.